All right, so this is part 2 of the Zhang Incorporated Chapter 8 problem, okay? Parts A, B, C, and D are on a separate video. So if you're looking at this problem in your practice problem set, you've noticed that this right here is the original information, and this is new for these parts, okay? So let's look at what we have new for these parts, and then we'll reorganize a little bit, okay? So what do we have that's new? Well, we've got a mortgage of $500,000 attached to the building and land, and we're going to change the fair market value of the building and the fair market value of the land, and the fair market value of the stock remains at $300,000. So first thing I'm going to do is rewrite this little chart so that we have things organized. All right, so we know that there was no mention of a change in the fair market value of inventory. So that is going to remain the same. For the building, the fair market value of the building is now $250,000. And the adjusted basis does not change. And the fair market value of the land is now $530,000. And the adjusted basis does not change. So what does that do for us from a total perspective? Well, we need to recalculate those. All right, so as we recalculate those, we get a fair market value of $800,000. Our adjusted basis is still $410,000, okay? And so now we've got these revised facts. And so now let's look at our parts. So for part E, we are asked how much gain or loss does Zhang recognize on the exchange, assuming the revised facts. All right. So E all right, so gain or loss recognized, assuming the revised facts. All right, so what do we have to do? Well, we need to look at what Zhang receives, okay? And we know that she receives stock, and the fair market value of the stock is $300,000. And we know that she also receives mortgage relief, right? The corporation assumes a mortgage, and the corporation assumes a mortgage of $500,000. Okay? Now, what do we know about this mortgage? So we've got to take a look at this mortgage, okay? Because this mortgage causes us a little bit of a problem, because we see that the mortgage is $500,000, and that is greater than the total adjusted basis of what was contributed, right? Because here's our total adjusted basis. So that's greater than $410,000, which is the total adjusted basis, oops, of contributed property. Okay, and this is one of those exceptions. When the mortgage relief exceeds the total adjusted basis of the contributed property, you have to then recognize the gain. Okay, so even though this is a Section 351 transfer, because the mortgage relief is greater than the total adjusted basis of property transferred, Zhang must recognize gain of the amount of that mortgage minus the total adjusted basis, which is $90,000. Okay, so the answer for part E is she is going to recognize a gain of $90,000 on the transfer. Now we could answer the other question too, right? So she has to recognize that gain. How much gain does she realize? That wasn't a question, but we should answer that anyway, right? So what does she get? She gets the fair market value of the stock plus the mortgage relief minus the tax basis, right, of all the assets. Okay, and so what is her realized gain? Well, her realized gain is significantly larger than her recognized gain. Her realized gain is $390,000. So that is her realized gain. Okay? So that is part E. Part F, all right, asks kind of the next obvious question: what is her basis in the stock? Okay, so what is her basis in the stock? So we have to look at the adjusted basis of property contributed. All right. Now, since we had a recognized gain, we have to add that recognized gain. But pay attention. Remember, that's only the recognized gain, not the realized gain. and that was $90,000. Okay, and then remember we get to subtract out that mortgage assumed by the corporation. Whoops. That doesn't look like a parenthesis. There we go. Okay. So we do that arithmetic, and what do we find out? Well, we find out that her tax basis in the stock is 0. Okay? And so the big takeaway from this part is, remember that when you have a recognized gain in the exchange, that works to increase your basis in the stock. Okay? And then part G, way up here, what does part G ask us? Oh, what is the corporation's adjusted basis in each of the assets received in the exchange? All right, so now we're looking at the corporation's perspective. All right, so what is the corporation's adjusted basis in the assets received? Okay. All right, so remember that typically you get carryover basis, right? So normally the tax basis to the corporation is the carryover tax basis, okay? But in this situation, we also have that gain, right, that she recognized. So the gain recognized impacts here too. So tax basis for the corporation equals carryover basis plus, all right, you have to allocate the gain recognized plus the allocated gain recognized by Zhang in the transfer, okay? And so you may ask yourself, well, how is that gain allocated? Well, that gain is going to be allocated based on the proportion of the asset's fair market value. Okay, so let's do the math on that. All right, so let's start with inventory. All right, and so what do we have? We've got the carryover basis, all right, plus allocated gain based on proportion of fair market value. All right, so its fair market value, the inventory's fair market value was $20,000. Total fair market value for all of the assets under our new information was $800,000. So let's put that in here. Make sure I get the right amount of zeros in there. Okay. And remember, the total gain was $90,000. So you're allocating that gain based on a ratio. All right, so I'll squeeze that a little bit so you can see the total ratio. I'll close my brackets. Okay. And so then this is going to be equal to the corporation adjusted tax basis for each asset. Okay, and when we do the math on this, it turns out to be $12,250. Okay, so that's the inventory. So we have to do that for the building and the land as well. All right, so I'm going to make this a little bit easier to write. Okay, so we started with the carryover basis. So we got to find our carryover basis. And that was $100,000 plus its allocated portion of the gain based on its proportion of fair market value. So it's very formulaic here. All right. So we've got a proportion all set up. Here, I'll squeeze this down so you can see the whole proportion. Okay. And now we've got to do the math on that. And so our adjusted tax basis for the building turns out to be $128,125. All right. And we still have to do the land. But again, we start with carryover basis. So let's look at the carryover basis for the land. That was $300,000. And then we have to allocate the amount of recognized gain based on fair market value. Don't forget to multiply by the gain. All right, squeeze that down so you can see the whole deal. All right, we do the math, and then our adjusted basis on our land is $359,625. Whoops. $25. And that gives us a total basis in all of the assets okay, of $500,000. And that makes sense because what is this $500,000 equal to? It's equal to, whoops, the 410, I think I squeezed that one in there, all right, 410,000 of carryover basis plus the recognized gain of $90,000. So that's your sanity check, all right? So this is, a great sanity check of the total value of your tax basis and assets. Now, obviously, you need to separate that out. You got to do the allocation by asset, but it's a good sanity check. All right, that is it for the Chapter 8 practice problem. Thanks, guys.